Tech Talk Thursday, please go to that link, and then when you get there, scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see the date. Today's date, 6/17/21, and that'll be Bob's presentation. Go ahead and open that up, and he'll direct us as to which page we need to be on. So we'll just take a few seconds to do that. In the meantime, I will say that we are not going to take roll tonight, but are there any announcements from N3SH or any other club that cares to put those out? Please call KE7FD. Okay, not hearing any announcements. Let's see. I will point out that it looks like, just glancing at the calendar here, a week from Saturday, on June 26th and 27th, will be a field day 2021. Any and all are invited to come to the N3SH site. As I'm sure anyone's welcome to go to any other club-sponsored field day location, but speaking for N3SH, we will be at the South Park at the Babcock Shelter, and anyone is welcome to show up and muse about or operate, whatever tickles your fancy, but we will be glad to see anyone there. So with that, let me just reset. All right, Bob, NU3Q, are you there?
Net controls is NU3Q, ready to go.
Okay, Bob, so I'm turning it over to you, and I would like to ask everyone to hold their questions until Bob has completed his presentation, and he asks for questions. Now, if someone has to leave early, and you need to ask a question, in that case, please do so. Bob will tell you what he's doing with his presentation tonight. And Bob, it's up to you. Whenever you want to ask questions, I'll let you run net control for yourself there. And so, with that being said, Bob, NU3Q, this is KE7FD. Over to you.
Okay, KE7FD NU3Q, just so everybody is aware, I am live on YouTube right now on NU3Q Amateur Radio. So if anybody's in front of the computer, I have my presentation ready to go. You can watch it on the channel. Do you need me to tell you when to flip slides?
Bob, we have everything up on the website, on the club website. So everyone has been instructed to pull that up. And if it's the same thing on your YouTube, I guess either way. But it is present. I'm looking at it right now. NU3Q Labs presents. So over to you.
QSL, okay. Yeah, I'll just let you know I'm flipping slides here. That'll make it easier. So you're correct, starting with the title page where it says NU3Q Labs Presents, which is a kind of a little moniker I came up with. It's not a real company, by the way, so no worries there. Hi. Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for having me tonight. My name is Bob. Call is here, November Uniform 3, Quebec, NU3Q. I am the Allegheny County ARES Emergency Coordinator. For anybody who doesn't know me personally, tonight I will talk about my Go Kit, how it came into fruition from pretty much the depths of my gray matter upstairs, hi, down to a finished product through my hands. So here we go. So move over to, I'm going to switch some scenes here. Okay, so we're going to switch to page 2 on the slide. Okay, to start out with, it's a little some little fun I came up with. My cat Heidi likes to sniff things. She's very curious, so my wife and I came up with a little saying that she approves everything. So when she sniffs it, she gets her approval, and she rubs it too. So when I show her my go box, she gave it the sniff and the rub. So it's kitty approved. Hi. Moving on to page 3. Another little fun moniker here. I'm sure most of you know what movie I'm referring to here. So I'll take a break here and see if I know what movie I'm talking about.
That would be everyone's seasonal favorite radio story.
Yep, the Christmas Story, exactly. You offer your eye out. Haha. I'm sure you get my little reference there with the BB gun. Hi. Moving on to page 4. Okay, trivia question tonight. Who knows the amateur radio connection with the foregoing movie? Any takers? Okay, moving on to the next page for the answer. The answer is the narrator Gene Shepard. His call sign is Kilo 2 Oscar Romeo Sierra, who now is sadly a silent key, who was the narrator of the Christmas Story movie. He played the narration part of the adult Ralphie in the movie. If you look up his name on YouTube, there are some clips where he talked about his ham shack. He has some very interesting stories, so when you get a minute, go off to YouTube, you'll find some stories where he talks about his ham shack growing up. Moving on to the next page. Okay, my motivation for building the box was pretty much fourfold here, as you can see in my slide. The first most important element is for quick deployment. It's ready to go at a moment's notice should we get an Aries or an ACS call out. Secondly, there's no wasted time connecting my radio to the tuner, sound card, battery, etc. All components needed are self-contained, already connected, and already mounted. The only thing I have to do is connect an antenna to it. We're good to go. And the best part of all, this runs totally off the grid. So no AC power needed. It runs off a bio-NO battery, which I'll talk about in a bit. And I also made up a wiring harness too. There's 2 parts to it. One part is to charge the battery, and the second part is the port for external power, which I'll talk more about a bit as well. Moving on to the next page. Okay, when I was dreaming this idea, obviously I was going to need a case for it. So I went on the interwebs, as Richard Rawlings would say, hi, and I found my a potential candidate here in this picture, which is a plastic ABS 19-inch flight rack case, size 6RU, which is basically about maybe 8 to 10 inches high. That's my first candidate. However, moving on to the next slide. From a budget standpoint, this is very pricey at $150. And the extra expense to buy a shelf or two, extra charge. Downer number 2 is the shipping cost. Being an oversized item, as you folks know, UPS, FedEx, etc., they charge extra for oversize. And the last thing of concern was for me is grounding, being that it was an ABS plastic, and plastic, as you know, is non-conductive, meaning it will not conduct electricity. So grounding was a concern for me. Next slide. Until one day I had the aha moment. I saw the answer. I found a metal case, Army surplus, as you can see in the picture here. This is a U.S. Army shell box, 50 caliber, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see on the box there, it was dated 5/15/1966, which put us early on in the Vietnam era. So I'm wondering if this box saw any action in the jungles of Vietnam. If you look in the picture, you will note there are some metal slides here. The purpose of those metal slides was to take some fingers that came out of the assembly, that box to slide in there, and they could load their machine gun up real fast for easier loading, for quick loading, so they could make a quick dispatch of the VCs. So what I had to do, moving on to the next slide. So the answer finally, as I said before, this is a Vietnam era surplus Army ammo box, which I believe is 50 caliber. I found this at Ralph's Army Surplus in Monroeville for $70, which is on Business 22, which is kind of between Center Road and Route 48, if you know what I'm talking about. It's on the eastbound side of the road going towards Murraysville. They have all kind of stuff there in that store. I have all kind of fun there. Being priced at $70 is definitely a more cost-effective solution, obviously. And the other win-win, all metal construction. Makes for better grounding purposes. I get more surface area of ground, the better ground we have. Moving on to the next slide, please. So obviously I started mocking this box up. The first thing I did was add a handle. What I got there from the home improvement store, get them anywhere, Lowe's, Home Depot, hardware store, etc., etc., is a cabinet handle, and I put that on the box. What I had to do is cut down the size of the threads in the screw there to make it shorter, because those screws are long for make for cabinet, because the cabinet's a good inch and a half thick. So I had to cut those screws down to allow for the thickness of the lid. This I guess is around right an eighth of an inch for the box, is the size of the metal, maybe a little thicker, but definitely a heavy gauge steel box. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where I brought up the subject of the slides. Those slots there, I had to get rid of those because it gave me some problems with mounting. So I had to carefully drill the rivets out. And then I got some, the same people make the epoxy. They make a two-part metal, liquid metal. It's like two parts like epoxy. I mixed a batch of that up and filled the holes with that, and I took my grinder and smoothed that down. So that's how I filled the holes back in after I took out the slots. Okay, next slide. Next step was the mocking the cooling fan. Being the box is kind of more or less a confined space, I had to put a 12-volt muffin fan in there, which I got for free. My cousin had one sitting in his garage doing nothing, so free is good. So what I did to make the cooling fan, you'll notice in the picture there, that Craftsman drill belonged to my father. That is a slow speed drill, around 500 RPMs. I was using a wood hole saw. The secret is you can use wood hole saws in metal, with the caveat you have to do at a very slow speed. Once again, this drill's 500 RPMs. So I put some good cutting fluid on there. Once again, I found some of my father's old cutting fluid. My father was a machinist. And I had some good old-time sulfur-based cutting oil, which today would be considered a carcinogen, so when I used that I had to clean my hands off real good after I was done using it. So I put some metal into put some cutting fluid into the metal, and just slowly, carefully, very light pressure on the drill made the hole. Next slide. Okay, the next item on the agenda was to put the mount for the power switch and the voltmeter mount. As you see in the picture there, I had to take my Sawzall and cut that mount in half to fit in the box. What I bought at Dayton one year, actually I bought all the pieces that was a Dayton from the guy in New Jersey. Let me get his name here. I got it right here in front of me here in my box. Quicksilver Radio. That's the vendor I bought those, my little parts and pieces from, like the voltmeter and the switch and the mount. So I had to take that four port mount, cut it in half to make it for two slots. Next slide. Naturally, the other thing I wanted to worry about is neatness inside the box. So I found some old Panduit, some old plastic raceway, which I had laid in my garage. And I cut pieces of that out for the box to handle all the wiring later on. You'll see in the picture coming up in a bit. Also in the picture you'll notice I made my own battery bracket on the left, and on the right side of the box is the grounding bar, which I bought at Lowe's, I believe. That's the same type of grounding bar they use in breaker panels. I bought that for like $2 or $3, very inexpensive. Next slide. Like I said at the top of the presentation, everything in the box is self-contained, so the only thing I have to do is hook up my antennas. So I drilled 2 holes for the SO239 connectors in the box. Since I'm using the ICOM IC7100, it obviously has 2 antenna ports, one for HF and 6 meters, and the other for 2 meters and 440. So I took some coax jumpers and put one end on those connectors inside the box, and the other end obviously goes to the radio in the back on the SO239. Next slide. Okay, at the top of the presentation I'll mention my wiring. I made up a custom wiring harness. Once again, I bought the pieces from Quicksilver Radio, as you can see in the picture. These are enders from POWERPOLEs. The bottom set of poles is for to charge the battery, and the top set of poles I have a jumper wire inside here with power poles in the end where I can pull off the battery and to the main power cord, as you'll see later on, and connect that in, where I can hook that into a generator or a solar panel or what have you for another source of power. Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is the final mock-up, as you can see in the picture. In the upper left hand corner is the SIGNALINK box, and I'll talk more about that, how I mounted that in a bit, along with the other stuff. And in the center is the star of the show, so to speak, is the ICOM 7100 brain. In the lower left hand corner is the LDG auto tuner, which makes up to the radio, and I'll talk more about how I mounted that in a bit as well. along with the radio itself in the lower right hand corner. And in the upper right hand corner you'll notice the power switch and the voltmeter. Next slide. Okay, so next stop is painting the box. I found out through trial and error, and I started painting the box, the army green would not let paint stick, so I tried sanding it. Still no go. What I had to end up doing, going back to my father's tool stash, he had a big old Rockwell grinder, which is about a good foot long, big behemoth, and I put the big wire brush on that thing, and boy did that take the paint off high. So once I got the box pretty much bare metal, I was able to finally paint it. What I did after I got the cleaned down to the bare metal, I gave it a quick spray cleaner just to clean all the crud and everything off the box so the paint would stick. So what I did is I used Rust-Oleum farm implement enamel. I first started off with the red primer first. Put on 3 coats of that. And the between coats I did a real quick fine sanding with 600 grit wet sandpaper. Just take some of the roughness off of it to make it look nice. When the primer was done, I put the top coat of the gray on. Why did I select Ford Gray as my color choice? The first thing, and the obvious thing, is to draw suspicion away from the law enforcement folks. Otherwise, they might think I'm a terrorist. So that's why I had to get rid of the green, so it would not look questionable. And next slide. At the time I built this box in 2018, this is our old tractor which we sold last year to my next door neighbor, but it's 1948 Ford 8N tractor celebrating its 70th birthday of continuous use. Belonged to my grandfather. It's the same Ford Gray that's on that tractor, so I did that to kind of commemorate its anniversary. But most of you probably know these Ford tractors are pretty common nowadays. You still get parts from them and whatnot. This thing was a real workhorse, and I do kind of miss it, but we hardly used it anymore, so that's the reason we sold it. Next slide. Okay, as I mentioned before with the prep work, I got that down to the bare metal and gave it a good cleaning, as you can see in the picture. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I start with the red primer. Next slide. The mounts, I painted them as well. I used red spray paint here. I used red Rust-Oleum spray paint to paint the mounts. On the left are the 2 straps for the battery. Next after that, in the up top, is the mount for the power switch and the voltmeter. Below that is a piece of scrap angle iron I had laying around the garage. I used that to put the silver toggle SPST switch for the fan inside the box to power that. And the 2 angle irons are in the top and the right for the wedge the battery in place. You'll see that in a bit. And that piece in the middle is called chicken wire, which is a 1/4 inch screen basically. I used that to cover the fan with. Next slide. Okay, and then here in the picture I'm depicting the final coat of the Ford Gray. Next slide. Okay, for the mounts, once again I use spray paint. I use Rust-Oleum black spray paint for the mounts there. That's what they look like. I figured black would give a nice little contrast inside the box. Next slide. And on to the main star of the show is the battery. As you can see, I used a Bio 15 amp hour battery, a lithium 5-phosphate iron battery, Life PO4 for short. The nice thing about these Life PO4 batteries, they build upon the charge and build upon the charge to use them. That's why they have a longer life than your traditional SLA lead acid battery. And the nice feature of these batteries that Bio makes is they have a built-in PCM, a power control module inside the battery. It's like a fancy fuse of sorts to prevent overload and protect the equipment. But with that said, I do have fuses on to protect the radio. And the approximate runtime is 7.5 hours, even though in the field more like 4 hours because I beat it hard with a tuner. So if I don't use a tuner, my time would last a lot longer. But in reserve, I do have a 20 amp hour Bio battery which I can connect to the top port should this run out on me. Next slide. Okay, for your math types out there, hi. This is the runtime calculation formula. This is what you do to help you figure out how much time you get out of your battery by following the formula in the slide. However, I realize some people are not good at math, which is fine. So what Bio did, next slide. They have a runtime chart on their website. And if you look down here on the chart, my battery's listed. That's where I got to record the 7.5 hours from my battery. So once again, your mileage may vary. So once again, as I said before, in deployments I use my tuner quite a bit just to kind of match my antenna, even though my antenna is pretty much resonant. I just get a quick tune just to smooth it out. But that's pretty much what I did there, but I could probably get away without it. Because I use a Wolf River coil, Silverbolt 1000, take it anywhere. And I got the pretty much down to science now. We're going to move the ring up and down to tune it. Where I get pretty much like around a 1.5 to 1 SWR, which is pretty good. So in theory, I should not need to use the tuner, which will save the battery. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I mentioned before the homebrew battery mount. I used 2 pieces of scrap angle iron to wedge that battery in place. You'll notice in the pictures, one's there on the side and the other is on the other side. That kind of wedges the battery up against the case itself to hold it in place, so when it shifts around, the battery will not move, it will not come out. Next slide. Okay, now we're getting the tuner and the SIGNALINK mounting. To mount the tuner, I walked to my local Ace Hardware store one day and got some 2-inch angle irons, or angle brackets in this case. They're 2-inch, I believe. I took the screws off the case and put the screws back on the case, attaching the angle bracket to the case. And then once I got them in place, I marked the holes to drill for the tuner, so it's pretty simple. The SIGNALINK was a little more challenging. Next slide. Okay, to mount the radio, that's pretty much a no-brainer. For the radio itself, for the transceiver, I use the ICOM MB62, Mike Bravo 62 transceiver mounting bracket, and use the screws from the kit to mount the bracket to the ammo box and the radio to the bracket, obviously. For the control head of the radio, I used the optional MBA, the Mike Bravo Alpha 1 mounting kit for the control head. What I did to mount this is a wee bit more challenging, but not as challenging as the SIGNALINK Hi-Hi. I took the MBA1 bracket as a template to mark where I drill the holes in the ammo box. And I took the screws from the MBA1 kit to mount the control head directly to the ammo box underneath on the belly side of the box. That's how I did the control head for the radio. Next slide. Okay, another freebie here. The speaker I've had sitting in my basement here for many eons. This is an old radio from a Nokia cell phone. I used to have my old car back in the 90s. I pretty much took this speaker and recycled it for the radio. So, once again, a freebie. Next slide. Okay, here's where the fun begins. With the SIGNALINK sound card mounting, I took the same 2-inch brackets I got from Ace Hardware. What I did, next slide. I had to do some fancy work on that. On the SIGNALINK, I had to take off the covers and the printed circuit board. So the bare box is there. What I had to do, I had to drill a couple holes in the case of the SIGNALINK and put some pop rivets in there to hold the bracket to the SIGNALINK. Once I got this brackets mounted to the SIGNALINK, then it was a matter of me situating the SIGNALINK in the box where I wanted it, allowing for clearance for the lid. And I drilled the holes in the ammo case to mount the SIGNALINK. Okay, here's where this is a very important point here in the second bullet point in my presentation. If you'll notice, consulting a SIGNALINK schematic diagram, it has its own ground isolation circuit. So it would not interfere and avoid ground loops with the ammo case RF ground. What I had to do is separate the SIGNALINK ground from the ammo case RF ground by using plastic screws and fiber washers, reed non-conductive. So that kind of isolated the ground from the SIGNALINK to the ground in the case. In the end, once you separate the two grounds, you're able to transmit clean digital audio. Next slide. As I said at the top of the presentation, I walked to my local Lowe's store one day, back in the electrical aisle, for like $3. I picked up a ground bar, like they use in the circuit breaker panel, so I could ground the radio and the tuner. Next slide, please. We're now on the slide entitled Clean Grounds. So once I got the grounding bar put in and after painted, I had to take my little Dremel moto tool and clean the paint off where I had mount the grounds and the antennas, connectors, any place where a screw went through. I had to clean that out to make a good ground. And if you look on the right hand side, recall that anytime you use dissimilar metals, like aluminum to metal, in this case it was, I put a little aux guard on the ammo box, so when I screwed the screws and the SO239 connectors in, A, it made a better ground, and B, it avoids corrosion. Once again, dissimilar metals equals corrosion. Next slide. Okay, we're now on the slide entitled RF grounding. What I did is I jumpered the ground bus inside the case to a screw outside the box with a 3A to a 3A16 bolt to connect that bus bar to my external ground. On that stud there, I made up a ground wire, flat braid. Once again, more surface area, better ground. Next slide. I'm now on the slide entitled ground wire length. I did some research on this and discovered that the ground shouldn't be no longer than 7.8 feet. How did I come up with that number? It's based on a quarter wave of 10 meters. A quarter wave is 234 divided by the frequency, so in this case, on the upper end of 10 meters is 29.7 megahertz. So if you do the math, 234 divided by the 29.7, it comes up to 7.8 feet, which is approximate. The reason I went a little higher because I wanted to get it as short as possible. So I cut my ground wire to about 7 feet, a little under 7 foot long. Anything longer than that 7.8 foot, the ground becomes a resonant antenna. Next slide, please. Okay, as an FYI, when you do your Aries power pole mountings, if you look at the picture, there's a polarity standard we need to follow. That is, when you look at your power pole connectors viewed from the contact side, meaning opposite the wiring side, with the tongue down and hood up. Red goes on the left and black on the right. That's pretty much the polarity standard majority of groups use, including ARES. The red and black plastic housings slide together with molded and dovetails. And then if you look in the center of the picture, you can put a little metal pin in here in the dovetail hole, or you can put a drop of Gorilla super glue and hold it in place. Next slide. Okay, the fan switch. Once again, I said I found some old scrap metal in my garage. Cut it down to size, and you can see the silver toggle SPST switch for the fan. And I made up a couple wires here to hook the fan up. And as you notice, when I did my wiring, I followed a normal polarity convention. So I put 2 red wires here to indicate the switch is positive. Next slide. So for the fan switch, anytime you wire a switch, it's always wired hot. So in this case, when I wired this hot, meaning one lead goes to the feed, i.e. the battery, and the other end goes to the load, i.e. the plus lead on the fan. And I wired the switch ahead of the master power switch so I can control the power to the fan independently of the master power switch. Next slide. Okay, and this picture is the master power switch for the whole unit. And on the right hand side you can see the bracket that holds the voltmeter and the on-off switch. And you'll see the on-off switch, when you turn it on, it will glow so you know it's live. On the master power switch, there's 3 different leads on there. Next slide. I had to do this more or less by trial and error. I used an old battery. I forget what I used to test it for a load. Maybe it was the fan I used, but the directions unfortunately were not clear and I got that switch, but I was able to figure it out. So on the top is a red wire, which is the plus that goes straight to the feed. The middle wire I made orange to designate the switched feed, or the switch taught, which takes power from the battery to your load. So the red wire is your feed and the orange wire is your load. So in this case, the orange wire connected to the positive side of the radio and the positive side of the voltmeter, and the black is your common wire, which is your minus. I tied to the black wires to the radio, the tuner, the meter, whatever else was in there that required power. Next slide. Okay, I mentioned it at the top of the show in the slide entitled Wiring Harness now. I bought the custom wiring harness in pieces from the Quicksilver radio, and I pretty much made up 4 different leads, the bottom and the top. The bottom set of leads I have connected to a little banana plug there you see in the picture, which charges the battery. Next slide. And on the other set of leads I made for the external power, I made that, put an Anderson power pole on that, so I can plug that into the main power connector in the radio. So, as I mentioned before, the bottom part is for the battery and the top part is for external power. Next slide, please. So here is a picture of the box in its final stage, minus the radio and the control head and the tuner. So if you look in the picture in the lower left hand corner is the leads coming from the external power, which I can pull off from the back, we can pull the battery from the main power leads and plug that in its place right here to power the unit. And you'll notice what I did, just to be on the safe side, you'll notice these wire nuts to connect all my wires together. I put a little taper on so when this box moves, any vibration will not jar the wire nuts loose. And also another thing I did too here, if you'll notice in some of the wiring, I used some 12-volt ferrite beads to keep the noise out of the box, so that I'll pick up any RFI from the power. And I bought those online from Amazon from an automotive supplier. So just basically 12-volt ferrite beads to keep the noise out of the box. Next slide, please.
Bob, let's make sure we ID as well. This is K7FD.
Okay, NU3Q, thanks for reminding me. I got a little ahead of myself. Okay, moving on to the next slide. That's pretty much the end of my presentation there, so my parting thoughts are in the picture there. A little Star Trek humor here. Actually, the bands are not dead anymore, so I've had reports of good DX from people from like Japan and all the Euro nations, even China too, so the bands are starting to open up, thank goodness. And you see Mr. Spock's mode of operating CW, hi. Okay, so with that, this is NU3Q. I'm going to go ahead now and open the floor to any questions, both here on the radio and on the chat. This is NU3Q. Okay, once again, does anybody have any questions?
Real quick question, Bob. When you were drilling the holes and everything in the case, and it started out as being, I'm going to say waterproof, sealed and all. Is it still waterproof, or are there enough openings in it now where you'd have to be careful with that?
My wise sage advice is this. When I did the screws, I put washers on to make it waterproof. However, there's one point of entry for water in the box, just down at the bottom where the fan is at. So with that said, when I do take it out, I do try to cover it with a cloth just to be on the safe side. Even if it was still waterproof, I would still cover it anyway just to be safe. But as far as the lid is concerned, the lid is still waterproof on that box as well. So once again, with that expensive equipment, I would tend to recommend to justify being cautious. Even if it was still waterproof, I would still cover it just to be safe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I suspect that, your presentation was very thorough, and you've answered a lot of questions that before people even had a chance to formulate them. Do you have anything else to say there, Bob?
No, that's pretty much about it. I spoke my piece here in the box, so if does anybody else have any more questions, I'll be glad to answer them. KC3GMM NU3Q. Go ahead, Nate. How you doing?
Hey, good, Bob. And thanks too. I'm driving home and didn't get the visual of the presentation, but I enjoyed listening the whole way home. So thanks. I really appreciate it. I've used your radio I think a couple times now, and it's a nice setup. Just curious how you decided on which radio to put in there. Were there any other radios you considered, or did you that icon was the one you were going to use?
To answer your question, Nate, is very simple. At the time I designed this, I had a 7000 in my car, and I bought this 7100 as a secondary HF radio with the intent of making it field ready. As I said, top of my presentation, it was a pain in the butt trying to connect everything together and disconnect everything at the end. So that's the reason I dreamed up this idea of the box, is to have everything pre-connected. It's a matter of me, I'm done just to pull, just flipping the power switch to go off and disconnecting the SO239 or the PL259 off the box from my antenna. Put the lid on, take the antenna down, go and be done. The intention here was efficiency with speed. If we ever had an actual emergency where ARES or ACS would be called out, I'd be able to grab this box and go. Kind of akin to the Minutemen of the Revolutionary War type thing. So speed and expediency was the main factor behind this. Go ahead.
Very good, thank you. I appreciate it. Again, thanks for the presentation. I enjoyed it thoroughly. So back to you, Bob. U3Q from KC3GMM.
Okay, KC3GMM NU3Q. Do we have any other more questions out there? Okay, it sounds like there are more questions. I want to thank you folks for letting me demonstrate this tonight, and I look forward to our next Tech Talk Thursday, and I'll be sure to live stream that as well. So KE7FD NU3Q, I'm going to throw it back to you, Glenn.
It's K7FD. Bob, thank you very much. You've been running there for 45, 50 minutes, and it's not easy, and I appreciate taking time out, and we invite anyone who has an interest to present. You can reach out to me, KE7FD 7 Fox Delta. You can reach me on the N3SH reflector, or get hold of anyone who you know that's over here. They can put you in contact with me. Here's a thought. I think it's a good follow-up for what Bob has presented tonight, and I think it's natural to evolve to the next level. Is you know, if we ever have to show up at an emergency comm site, and I'm not even sure if that's the correct terminology, they would check us for probably ARIES certification. Even though you have a license, that doesn't mean they're going to let you in.
No.
and help communicate. So perhaps the next thing we should be looking at, or in the near future, is gaining, you know, what are the steps of gaining ARIES certification. I think there have been in the past training and testing available. I attended something like this probably 7, 8 years ago in Johnstown. But you know, maybe someone who has that certification can prepare something. Or if you have something else you'd like to prepare for July, we will be past Field Day, and there may be some other contests coming up that you think that might be of interest. Feel free to reach out to me, and we'll get you scheduled. We like to schedule these things a little bit in advance, and whether it's July or August or whenever you'd like to present, just let us know. So on behalf of N3SH, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and I'd like to thank the owners and operators of N3SH and N3FB for allowing us to use their repeaters for these presentations every third Thursday. So thank you very much, and we'll close the net and return the repeaters back to normal amateur use. This is KE7FD clear.
KE7FD NU3Q with an afterthought.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, as far as training is concerned, I can speak on this because I'm the EC. For ARIES certification and ACS as well, it's pretty much the same thing. You need to take your online FEMA NIMS classes, ICS 100 and ICS 700 to start. Once you get those two completed, there's an online ARRL class, EC001, you need to take, which further expounds on what you learned from ICS 100 and 700. Once you complete that, then you finish up with NIMS ICS 700 and ICS 800 for your level 2 certification. Once you have that, you're fully ARIES certified and can be deployed in an emergency situation to a particular site. And also we recommend anybody pursuing training to also take the Skywarn training as well, both the basic and the advanced training. And there's also a NIMS class on forecasting or preparing for severe weather, or forecasting severe weather, for the exact title of it. We would highly recommend people take that as well. So those are pretty much all the trainings you need to be a fully functional ARIES volunteer. Back to you, Glenn, NU3Q.
Okay, Bob, thank you very much. Appreciate that. One other thing comes to mind that was mentioned, like I said, the presentation I attended many years ago was it doesn't hurt to have Red Cross first aid training as well. You don't expect to be in that type of role, but these would be unusual circumstances, and so they just encouraged people to have that over and above.
Yeah.
Bob, thank you very much, and everyone else, thank you for attending KE7FD.
Okay, Glenn, thank you. NU3Q. I also want to add to another good thing to have besides the basic first aid is to have CPR training. I took mine like about 2 years ago before the pandemic hit. So that's another thing you should learn as well. Okay, once again folks, thank you. This is NU3Q. I'm going to go QRT here, shut down the stream, and head upstairs and have my dinner. Thank you again folks, I appreciate you having me tonight. As an NU3Q, I'm going to go QRT and good night all. 7-3 all the way around. And that concludes tonight's live stream presentation about my Go blocks. If you're interested in learning more about how I built it, please email me nu3q.radio@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to forward my slides off to you along with my pictures to give you some ideas or incentives to help you move along in that direction. This is NU3Q signing off from the stream. 7-3. Good night.